we have seen some organizations that say that are using renewable electricity and do this by contract or some kind of blockchain or some non-standardized REC system. On the other hand, you have seen some energy producers that are trying to take their own RECs without any third-party validation. Sure. What do you see in the world about that? Yeah. What's your point of view?
So maybe just really quickly about that, I think we first have to recognize what a REC is. And a REC is nothing more than a standardized contract between a producer and a consumer. And that standardized contract has the same criteria, same fundamental attributes, same rights, and same regulations for everyone on the whole market. So we make sure that essentially that REC is an agreement between the buyer and the seller, and it has lots of different elements included. And those elements are built up by the IREC standard, is built up by the contracts in place with the local issuers, built up by lots of different things. These standards are in place. And then the question is, you could say, you know, anyone can create a REC system because they can create a contract, but that doesn't mean that that contract is really standardized or really valid for the specific claims. And the other problem remains associated with that is the idea of having multiple contracts, different types of contracts with different meanings and different purposes in place. Because if there's all these different systems in place, one, you have a problem, just like with blockchain, that megawatt hour could be counted in different systems, that's a problem. Or you could also have the problem of essentially confusion, or that stakeholders think they're getting something that they are not. And the most important aspect of the IREC standard is that we create essentially a system from the top down where there's a standard in place, there's facilitators that facilitate the market in a neutral way, and then market players. And if you have organizations that are not very clear with the boundaries of the various organizations, you can have a lot of problems. Because if you have that standardized contract, that REC, and it's cheaper, for example, to get the REC to one party than it is to another party, it's unfair competition, of course, because you are essentially working with an underlying product, an underlying commodity in some ways, and that has to be the same for every user on that system. One, just for their general understanding, and two, for a fair market more generally. The last thing I'd like to say is that there's really no benefit in having multiple REC systems, because what we want is that end users are competing for renewable attributes and not competing, one, to understand various systems and what the differences are between them, and two, potentially trying to figure all these differences out, in a specific national region where it may not be legislated or well-defined as is. So I think that it's really important that we try and work towards standardized systems where everyone has a clearly defined role and everyone is, you know, essentially with a very clear position in the market, either as a market player, as a market facilitator, or as a standard setter.
It's important to the companies that consumes renewable energy to understand these concepts.